Good evening, guys. I have discussion C for you. Now we're discussing for C, we are discussing the policy side of dementia care. Okay, so please join me as we dig into the other side of dementia care policy related issue. Okay, so here we go. The child who stayed to help. A braided long form essay. Okay, the first door. The first time I realized I was responsible for an adult's well-being was mine. My grandmother had wandered out the back door. Give me 1 second, folks. In her nightgown. Her hair flattened on one side from sleep, her eyes bright with a purpose she couldn't name. She said she needed to check the chickens, though the coop had been torn down years earlier. The yard was damp with morning, the grass cold against my bare feet. I followed her because no one else was home, because she was confused, because she was mine. I didn't think of it as caregiving. I thought of it as keeping her safe. Children don't call this responsibility, they call it love. When I finally coaxed her back inside, promising her imaginary eggs, guiding her hand to the doorknob, I locked the door behind us, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Something in my mind, something in me understood that the world had tilted, and I was the one who had to steady it. Later, I would learn the world. Later, I would learn the word dementia. Later, I would learn parentification. But at 9, I only knew that adults could slip and children could catch them. The adult who knows what to do. In my 40s, working in health system leadership, I could walk into a room where an elder was frightened or disoriented, and feel my body shift into a familiar posture, alert, attuned, steady. I could read the emotional weather of a family in crisis. Before anyone spoke, I could anticipate the next problem before it surfaced. People called it intuition or talent or a gift, but gifts are unusual, usually freely given. This one was extracted. When my mother began forgetting things, small things at first, then large ones, I felt the old childhood readiness return, the learning forward, the leaning forward, the scanning, the sense that if I didn't handle it, no one would. I became the one who managed the appointments, the paperwork, the medications, the conversations with specialists. My siblings stepped back, not because they didn't care, but because they had learned long ago that I would step forward. And I did. Of course, I did. The grooves were already carved. The system that made it inevitable. People like to imagine that caregiving is a private matter, a family issue, a personal duty. But the truth is simpler and harsher. Caregiving is what happens when systems fail, when home and community based services are underfunded, when dementia care is fragmented, when long term care is treated as an afterthought, when the workforce is thin and exhausted, when respite is a luxury, when families are left to improvise. In those gaps, children become caregivers. The girl who sorted pills becomes the woman who coordinates specialists. The child who soothed a confused grandmother becomes the adult who manages a parent's decline. The daughter who learned to anticipate crisis becomes the professional who can hold a room together with her presence. We call this resilience, but resilience is often just the name we give to people who had no other choice. The double exposure, sometimes in the middle of a care planning meeting or a late night phone call about a parent's worsening symptoms. I feel the 9-year-old version of myself hovering just behind my shoulder. She is small. She is steady. She knows how to keep someone safe. She knows how to stay calm. She knows how to carry more than she should. But she is tired. Parentification leaves a kind of double exposure in adulthood. The the competent caregiver, the child who never got to stop being competent, the professional who can handle anything, and the girl who learned early that if she didn't handle it, no one would. This is the part people don't see. They see the capability, not the cost. The cost that accumulates. Parentific, parentified adults burn out differently, not in a sudden collapse, but in a slow erosion, a thinning of boundaries, a quiet depletion, a sense that rest is dangerous. Deletion is irresponsible, and asking for help is a kind of moral failure. We become the ones who say, "It's fine, I've got it," even when we don't. We become the ones who absorb the emotional weight of decline, illness, and family fear. We become the ones who hold everything together until we can't. And when we finally falter, people are surprised. They shouldn't be. The child who grew up inside inside someone else. Crisis becomes the adult who cannot imagine stepping away from one. The policy thread. There is a version of the story that focuses only on the family, the grandmother, the mother, the daughter. But the deeper truth is that parentification is policy failure long before it is personal. It is a personal one. In home care, workers were paid enough to stay in the field. Children wouldn't be sorting pills if dementia care were coordinated instead of scattered. Daughters wouldn't be translating medical instructions if respite care were accessible Children wouldn't be calming confused elders alone. If long-term care were treated as infrastructure instead of charity, families wouldn't be improvising care plans at the kitchen table. Parentification is not just a family dynamic, it is a symptom of a system that assumes women and girls will absorb whatever it cannot manage. The memory that returns. I remember another moment, my grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a spoon as if it were a foreign object. I remember guiding her hand, slowly showing her how to lift it, how to eat. I remember her looking at me with a kind of bewildered gratitude. I was 9. She was 78. The roles were reversed, and neither of us had chosen it. Years later, when my mother struggled to remember how to work the microwave, I felt the same ache in my chest, the same mixture of tenderness and sorrow, competence and grief, the same sense that I had been here before in a different kitchen with a different woman, but with the same responsibility. Parentification is recursive. It echoes across generations. The reframing that matters. Writing about parentification is not about blame. It's about clarity. It is about naming the forces, familiar, cultural, systematic, that shape a child into a caregiver long before she understands what she is losing. It is about honoring the competence without romanticizing the wound. It is about seeing the adult caregiver not as a saint or a martyr, but as someone who learned early that love meant labor and that labor meant survival. It is about asking What might have been different if the systems meant to support families had actually done so. And it is about offering the child retroactively the tenderness she deserved. The end that isn't the end. I sometimes imagine going back to that 9-year-old girl in the yard, the one guiding her grandmother back inside. I imagine telling her that that she is brave. Yes, but she is also a child, that she deserves safety, not responsibility, that she deserves care, not duty, that she deserves to be held, not to hold. I can't change what she carried, but I can change how I carry her. Parentification doesn't end when childhood does, but it can be rewritten, not erased, but understood, softened, reframed. The adult caregiver can learn to set down what the child never had permission to. And maybe that is its own kind of healing. When children become caregivers, it's a policy failure, not a family story. When I was 9, my grandmother wandered out the back door in her nightgown, convinced she needed to check the chickens. Though we hadn't had chickens in years, no adults were home, no services were available, no system existed to catch the crisis forming in our kitchen. So I did. I coaxed her back inside, locked the door, and pretended it was a game. I didn't know the word dementia. I didn't know the word caregiver. I certainly didn't know the word parentification. I only knew that adults could slip and that children could be forced to catch them. This is the part we rarely say out loud. Children become caregivers because our long-term system expects them to. The quiet epidemic we refuse to name. Across the country, too many children, especially girls, are performing the invisible labor of elder care. They sort pill. They sort pills. They calm confused grandparents. They translate medical instructions. They monitor wandering. They absorb adult fear. We call these children mature, responsible, wise beyond their years. But these are euphemisms, systematic abandonment. Parentification is not a niche psychological term. It is predictable. It is a predictable outcome of underfunded home and community-based services, dementia care shortages, long-term care workforce collapse, lack of respite and caregiver support. When adults cannot access support, the burden doesn't disappear. It simply moves downward onto daughters, granddaughters, and sometimes sons though far less often. It is not a family issue. It is a policy issue. The adult caregiver is often the child caregiver grown up. Decades later, working in healthcare system leadership, I could walk into a room where an elder was frightened or disoriented and feel my body shift into a familiar posture, alert, attuned, steady. People called it intuition. They called it a gift. But gifts are usually freely given. This one was extracted. When my mother began forgetting things, I became the default care coordinator. Not because I was the only one available, but because I had been trained in childhood to step forward. My siblings stepped back because they assumed I would, and I did. The child who grew up inside someone else's crisis becomes the the adult who cannot imagine stepping away from one. The cost of childhood caregiving shows up in adulthood. Parentified adults are extraordinarily capable and profoundly vulnerable. They are hyper attuned to others' needs, boundary thin in caregiving roles, guilt driven when they try to rest. Over functioning in families and workplaces, primed for burnout. These 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 traits make them exceptional caregivers, the ones who hold families together, who manage crisis, who coordinate care with precision. but they also make them easy to exploit, both at home and in the workplace or workforce. The system relies on their overfunctioning. It counts on their sense of duty. It assumes their exhaustion is inevitable. The political story we keep avoiding. We talk endlessly about the caregiving crisis, but we rarely talk about the child. Caregiving crisis, the one happening quietly in kitchens, living rooms, and backyards across the country. Why? Because acknowledging it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths. Our long-term care system is not just inadequate. It is designed to rely on unpaid labor. That unpaid labor is disproportionately performed by women and girls. The absence of formal supports creates conditions where children become the safety net beneath the safety net. Parentification is not a sentimental story. It's about family devotion. It's it is evidence of a system that has offloaded its responsibility onto children. What policymakers must do now, if we want to stop children from becoming caregivers, we must stop designing systems that assume they will. That means fully funding home and community based services so families aren't forced to improvise care, expand dementia capable services so cognitive decline doesn't become a household emergency, rebuilding the long term care workforce with wages that reflect the complexity of the work. Guaranteeing respite so adults can rest and children can remain children. Recognizing child caregiving as an adverse childhood experience and treating it as such. This is not charity, this is infrastructure. The reframing that matters. I sometimes imagine going back to that 9-year-old girl in the yard guiding her grandmother back inside. I imagine telling her she is brave, yes, but she is also a child, that she deserves safety net or safety, not responsibility, that she deserves care, not duty. I can't change what she carried, but policymakers can change what children carry now. Parentification is not inevitable. It is a choice made by budgets, legislation, and policy will. If we want children to grow up whole, we must build a long-term care system that does not require them to grow up too soon. Okay, guys, that is it for tonight. I will see everybody tomorrow for shows. For now, Gator Wellness. Take care, folks.